There's a decision most people make around their mid-20s to early 30s that feels responsible, mature, and socially celebrated. It's the decision to buy the biggest house they can afford, or more accurately, the biggest house a bank will let them afford. This isn't presented as a financial gamble. It's framed as building equity, investing in your future, and the American dream. Parents beam with pride. Friends congratulate you. Society treats it as a rite of passage into adulthood. The decision feels not just normal but inevitable. Here's what actually happens. A young couple, often with modest savings, walks into a bank. They're approved for a mortgage that will consume 30 to 40% of their gross income for the next 30 years. They sign documents they barely understand, committing to interest payments that will, over time, nearly double the purchase price. They become homeowners, yes, but more accurately, they become debt servants. Charlie Munger would look at this and ask the most important question nobody else is asking. What are the incentives at play here, and who benefits most from this decision? The answer is uncomfortable. Real estate agents earn commissions based on sale price. They're incentivized to push you toward expensive properties. Mortgage lenders profit from decades of interest payments. The longer and larger the loan, the better for them. Home builders, insurance companies, furniture retailers, home improvement chains. Entire industries prosper when you stretch your budget to its limit. Even your social circle reinforces this behavior. Humans are tribal creatures. We look to our peers for signals about appropriate behavior. When everyone you know is buying homes at the edge of their affordability, not doing so feels like failure. This is social proof bias at its most powerful. The tendency to assume that if everyone is doing something, it must be correct. Add in authority bias. Financial advisors, many of whom earn commissions on mortgage products, tell you home ownership is forced savings. News articles proclaim that renters are throwing money away. Government policy subsidizes mortgages through tax deductions. When authority figures across multiple domains align on the same message, questioning it feels almost heretical. But intelligent people fall into this trap precisely because they're intelligent enough to rationalize it. They calculate that their home appreciated 20% in 5 years, without accounting for property taxes, maintenance, insurance, opportunity cost, or the transaction costs of buying and selling. They confuse a leveraged bet on a single asset in a bull market with financial wisdom. The decision feels safe because it's reversible. You can always sell, right? This is status quo bias meeting availability bias. People remember the neighbors who sold for a profit, not the millions who lost homes in 2008. They anchor to recent good outcomes and assume these represent the norm. Here's the deeper trap. This decision doesn't just lock up capital, it locks up life options. That mortgage payment arrives every month, whether you're employed or not, healthy or sick, fulfilled in your career, or desperate for change. The house becomes golden handcuffs. You can't take the job that excites you because it pays less. You can't relocate for opportunity because selling costs 6 to 8% in commissions and fees. You can't weather a career transition because your reserves are tied up in an illiquid asset. Munger understood that the most important financial decisions aren't about maximizing returns. They're about maintaining flexibility and avoiding irreversible stupidity. When you commit 30–40% of your income for 30 years to service debt on a single asset concentrated in one geographic market, you've eliminated flexibility. You've put yourself at the mercy of local economic conditions, national interest rate policy, and your own continuous employment in a rapidly changing economy. The normal decision isn't buying shelter. That's rational. The trap is buying the maximum shelter a lender will finance, then convincing yourself it's investment strategy rather than consumption financed by debt. It's confusing the good feeling of ownership with the mathematical reality of leverage, concentration risk, and opportunity cost. Most people never run the inverse calculation that Munger would insist upon. What if I'm wrong? What if my income drops? What if this market corrects? What if better opportunities emerge elsewhere? They focus entirely on the upside scenario that's been marketed to them, ignoring the many paths where this decision constrains them for decades. The cultural narrative is so strong that even pointing out these dynamics triggers defensive reactions. People have tied their identity to their homes. Questioning the financial wisdom of maximal home ownership feels like questioning their life choices, their intelligence, their status as responsible adults. And that's exactly why it's worth questioning. When a decision is so thoroughly defended by social consensus, financial industry incentives, and personal ego investment, that's precisely when rational analysis matters most. Charlie Munger built his fortune on a simple principle. It is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. The decision to maximize housing consumption through debt isn't stupidity in the traditional sense, it's worse. It's culturally sanctioned financial imprudence disguised as wisdom. Let's apply inversion, Munger's favorite mental model. Instead of asking, how do I build wealth through home ownership, the question everyone asks, invert it. How does maximum home ownership prevent wealth building? The answer reveals itself in layers. First, opportunity cost, perhaps the most important concept in finance and the one most consistently ignored. When you lock $50,000 into a down payment and commit to $2,500 monthly mortgage payments, that's capital that cannot be deployed elsewhere. Over 30 years, consistently investing that down payment and the difference between a modest housing cost and a maximum mortgage in a diversified portfolio compounds dramatically. The S&P 500 has historically returned about 10% annually. A disciplined investor with lower housing costs and higher savings rates can accumulate extraordinary wealth through this simple mathematics. But people don't see this. They see their neighbor's home appreciation and think they're winning. They don't calculate that their $400,000 home that appreciated to $500,000 over 8 years delivered a 25% total return, barely 3% annually. Meanwhile, their foregone investment opportunity in that same period would have doubled at market returns. They're celebrating while losing the wealth accumulation race. Second, concentration risk. Munger preached diversification of risk. When 50–70% of your net worth is in a single asset, a specific physical structure in a specific neighborhood, in a specific city, you're extraordinarily concentrated. You're exposed to local employment markets, regional economic health, municipal tax policy, school district quality, neighborhood demographics, environmental risks, and countless other factors beyond your control. Professional investors would never accept this level of concentration. But homeowners don't think of themselves as investors making a concentrated bet. They think of themselves as people who need places to live. This framing error prevents them from seeing the risk clearly. Third, liquidity destruction. Munger valued liquidity, the ability to act when opportunities present themselves. Real estate is among the least liquid assets you can own. Selling takes months, costs 6 to 8% in friction, and requires market timing luck. When opportunity knocks, a business venture, a career change, a market dislocation creating investment opportunities, your capital is trapped in drywall and foundation. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They maintain liquid reserves even if it means losing to inflation, because they know opportunities are unpredictable and valuable. The middle class, convinced that every dollar must be put to work, locks their capital in their residence and wonders why wealth-building opportunities always seem to go to others. Fourth, the psychological trap of sunk costs. Once you've bought the maximum house, you're psychologically committed to justifying that decision. You become defensive about your local market. You ignore warning signs. You convince yourself that cosmetic improvements add value, even though data shows most renovations return 50–70 cents on the dollar when you sell. You're trapped by your own ego investment in being right about this massive decision. Munger understood that our psychological need to be consistent with past decisions causes terrible ongoing decision-making. The person who bought at the top of their budget will defend that decision for decades, even as it constrains their life and wealth accumulation. Fifth, the margin of safety principle. Munger and Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway on always maintaining a margin of safety, buying assets for significantly less than intrinsic value, keeping reserves for unexpected problems, never stretching to the maximum of their capacity. The standard American mortgage strategy violates this principle completely. You stretch to your maximum approved borrowing, assuming your income will remain stable or grow, assuming no major repairs will be needed, assuming market conditions will remain favorable. When you operate at the edge of your capacity, you're one surprise away from disaster. And life is nothing but surprises. Most people confuse comfort with security. A large house feels secure, all that space, that nice neighborhood, those good schools. But financial security is optionality. It's having multiple paths forward when circumstances change. It's being able to say no to jobs you hate, yes to opportunities that excite you, and I'll wait when markets are expensive. The person stretched thin on a mortgage payment has none of this. They're trapped by their consumption decision masquerading as investment. The cruelest part? Small differences in housing costs compound into massive differences in lifetime wealth. The person who chooses the $300,000 home instead of the $500,000 home, all else being equal, will likely retire with hundreds of thousands more in liquid assets. Not because they earned more or invested more brilliantly, but because they didn't confuse consumption with investment and understood that wealth is built through accumulation of productive assets, not living in expensive ones. This isn't theoretical. Munger himself lived in the same modest house for decades while accumulating billions. He understood the difference between consumption goods and investment assets. Most people don't. Charlie Munger would approach the housing decision completely differently, not because he's smarter, but because he's willing to think independently and accept social discomfort in exchange for financial rationality. The Munger approach starts with defining the actual problem. The problem isn't, what's the most house I can afford? That's the bank's question, designed to maximize their profit. The real question is, what's the minimum housing that adequately serves my needs while preserving maximum capital for wealth-building investments? This inversion is psychologically uncomfortable because it requires swimming against social currents. When peers are buying 3,500 square foot homes in desirable suburbs, choosing a 1,500 square foot home in a perfectly adequate neighborhood feels like failure. It isn't. It's rational capital allocation. But rationality often feels socially awkward. Munger's first principle would be, buy well below your means. If a bank approves you for $500,000, consider spending $250,000, $300,000. This immediately creates breathing room. Your mortgage payment drops from consuming 35% of gross income to perhaps 18 to 20%. This difference, $1,000, $1,500 monthly, becomes your wealth-building engine. That differential, invested monthly in low-cost index funds over 30 years, will compound into significant wealth. Not through brilliance, but through consistency and time. This is how ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results, not by making brilliant investments, but by avoiding stupid consumption decisions and letting compound returns work. The second principle, treat your residence as a consumption good, not an investment. You need shelter. Buy adequate shelter. Don't confuse this necessity with wealth building. This mental framing prevents the cognitive traps that ensnare most homeowners. You won't agonize over whether granite countertops add value. You won't convince yourself that a swimming pool is an investment. You'll see these correctly as consumption expenses that bring utility or don't, but aren't creating wealth. Third principle, preserve optionality ruthlessly. The modest home costs less to maintain, heat, cool, furnish, and repair. Lower property taxes, lower insurance. This isn't just about monthly cash flow, though that matters. It's about maintaining the option to change course. With lower fixed costs, you can weather income disruptions, pursue career changes, relocate for opportunity, or deploy capital when others are frozen. Munger often quoted Buffett, "The first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. When your housing costs are modest, you don't have to interrupt your investment program when your furnace dies or your roof needs replacement. You have reserves. You maintain consistency. Over decades, this consistency matters far more than clever tactical moves." Fourth principle, increase housing consumption as wealth grows, not before. Most people do the reverse. They buy the expensive house anticipating their income will grow into it. This is betting your financial future on optimistic projections. Munger would call this foolish. He'd say, prove you can build wealth first. Then, If you desire more house, buy it with accumulated capital, not leveraged hopes. The person who buys modestly at 30, invests the difference and upgrades at 45 with accumulated wealth is in a completely different position than the person who bought maximally at 30 and spent 15 years house poor. Same ending house, radically different wealth position. Fifth principle, study incentives relentlessly and don't follow advice from people whose incentives oppose yours. The real estate agent who says you can afford more is telling the truth. For them. They earn more commission. The mortgage broker who maximizes your loan is optimizing their income, not yours. Even well-meaning friends who bought expensive homes are psychologically invested in justifying their own decisions by encouraging you to make similar ones. Munger was famous for asking why repeatedly until he understood the true motivations behind advice or decisions. Most people never ask this. They follow social scripts without examining who benefits from those scripts. The rational path isn't complicated. It's simple, actually. Buy adequate housing well below your borrowing capacity. Treat your home as consumption, not investment. Invest the difference between what you could spend and what you do spend. Maintain this discipline for decades. Ignore social pressure to consume like your peers. Preserve optionality and liquidity. Never interrupt compound returns for consumption goods. This path requires zero genius. It requires only the willingness to think differently from your social group and the discipline to maintain rational behavior while others don't. Munger understood something most people don't. Financial mediocrity isn't caused by lack of opportunity or bad luck. It's caused by systematic bad decisions that feel good socially but are terrible financially. The person who chooses social comfort over financial rationality will achieve socially normal results, which is to say, financial mediocrity. The person who chooses financial rationality over social comfort won't just build more wealth, they'll build freedom. And freedom, the ability to say yes to opportunities, no to degrading situations, and I'll wait when patience is required, is what wealth actually buys. This is what Munger meant when he said avoiding stupidity was more important than seeking brilliance. The brilliant move isn't finding the next Amazon. It's avoiding the culturally endorsed financial trap that most people walk into voluntarily, then spend decades justifying. The normal decision leads to normal results. Charlie Munger didn't build extraordinary wealth through normal decisions. Neither will you.